and people can join in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll monitor that. So yeah, just to say good morning to everyone and thanks for joining. So this is the first a new kind of webinar series from us in Curve Transform. So it's more around kind of technical led content led from our kind of solution architects and consultants, of Jhonny being one of those, and it's really around adding value to IT professionals. So, getting into the systems that you guys are using and providing more tips and tricks. So the idea is that hopefully, you walk away from this webinar today with, even if it's just one thing that you didn't know you could do, or a process that you could do a little bit quicker. So that's definitely the intention for today. Jhonny, if you go to the next slide quickly. So yeah, before getting into the bulk of the content, which will start very shortly, just a tiny little bit of housekeeping. Microphones and cameras are muted and off, and obviously that's pretty standard stuff, just to kind of make sure that the webinar flows correctly. But absolutely, we want interaction, we want questions. There's a couple of pre-recorded demos in here, so Jhonny, there is a Q&A at the top. We encourage questions throughout that Q&A, and then when those recorded demos are playing, Jhonny can be answering any questions. And at the end, we'll also open up the floor if we've got time. And also just give a little bit of heads up, we did a run through of this and it did slightly go over on time. So if you do need to drop off, appreciate, that's absolutely fine, but there will be the recording set round afterwards. So that's it from me. And I'm going to hand over to Jhonny, who's going to go through today's session.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I appreciate you taking your time to join our session today. My name is Jhonny Marques. I'm a consultant at Curve Transform. I've been working with Intune for the past 5 years, designing, configuring, troubleshooting different aspects in numerous Intune environments. There is a lot of content that we are going to go through today. Quite frankly, we can probably spend 45 minutes discussing each aspect of Intune that we will be touching on today. So I'll try to keep the presentation moving. If there is, as David mentioned, if there is anything that that you need further clarification on, or if you have any questions, please feel free to add those questions to the Q&A section, and I'll be answering those whilst the demos are playing, and we will address any further questions at the end of the presentation. Now, I think it's important, before we jump right into what Intune is and what it does, for us to understand how the landscape has quickly changed over the last 5 years. Before the pandemic, most organizations had their single office, they had their rack space with their servers, with their data and their apps in their office. Most users were connecting to their environment via the workstations in their offices. The data was quite kept in a tight network boundary. There were some laptops for executives, and even if they wanted to access that data, it was done through remote access or VPN connections. And obviously, since the pandemic, the shift to cloud computing happened quite quickly. The security and the way that users were accessing our data was kind of put in the back burner to get people back online and working. We now have people working from all over the world in different locations, working from home, accessing our environment via the personal devices, BYOD, and it is important that we can manage access and the security to our environment. Thankfully, that's what Intune allows us to do. There are some challenges when we engage with customers that are brought up every time we engage with them. And some of those that we will be discussing today is, how do we manage a vast array of devices and system types, be it OS versions from Windows, Mac OS, and mobile devices, to the nature of the device, whether it will be corporate or personal devices. How do we ensure that those devices meet our compliance and security requirements? How can we deploy apps to users working remotely and they're not coming into the office? How do we make sure that those devices are actually protected against threats? And how do we make sure that those devices are patched? Thankfully, Intune gives us a way to tackle each of these challenges. And the aim of this webinar is to give you an answer to each of those. And at the end of this session, we'll be playing a recorded demo that tackles each of these challenges, obviously on a very basic level, because there's a lot that we can do. But the aim is that you can take something away from this if you're using Intune, learn something that you didn't know that Intune can do. And if you're not, this will hopefully give you a quick overview on what you can do with Intune. Now, before we go into what Intune is and what it does, there are three main pillars within Intune, which is your apps, where you can configure, deploy, and manage your apps updates. You can protect your apps and your data via app protection policies. You can remotely wipe and remove your corporate data from lost and personal devices. We have identities, which is where you manage access to your data, your apps, and your endpoint. You can enforce security policies to protect your environment and users. And you can configure features such as Windows Hello. And finally, we have devices. If we go back, we have devices, which is where we'll be focusing on today. To give us, we'll go through device configuration, how to ensure that your devices are compliant, how to configure Autopilot, and manage BYOD and personal devices. There are dedicated webinars that we'll be doing on identities and apps that will be followed over the coming months. And we'll be touching on those aspects today, but we are mainly focusing on devices on this session today. Now, I don't know why my animations are not working, but we'll roll through with it. How do we access Intune? Intune is a cloud-based service that can be accessed via a web portal. You can go and access Intune via intune.microsoft.com. To access Intune, you must have the required licensing, which can be either a business premium license, an enterprise license, be it E3, E5, or EMS, or the Microsoft Intune plan add-on. Now, within Intune, when people access Intune, it can be quite overwhelming. But today we are focusing on four distinct areas, which is your devices area, where you'll be enrolling, managing your devices, you'll be enforcing compliance policies, deploying configuration profiles, and you can perform remote actions such as remote help. You can wipe the device remotely or rebuild the device with Autopilot. We have our apps area, where you will be publishing, configuring, and deploying apps, managing the apps updates, and implementing app protection policies, which I'll be discussing a bit more in the demos that follow. Then we have our endpoint security area, which is where you will be implementing your endpoint protection policies. Here you can apply your ASAP policies, your security baselines, you can configure your AV policy, and ensure that your devices are encrypted via BitLocker. And lastly is your reporting area, your reports area, where you can actually track the compliance of your devices, manage the installation status of all of your apps, get security reports, and use user activity logs. Now, on the section that comes next, we have a quick demo on accessing Intune and navigating through these options. One thing is obviously talking about them, and another one is actually seeing it. So if you do have any questions, drop them in the chat. I'll be on there answering any questions as the demo plays on. And Excellent. So we go on to the next area. And this is where we start configuring our devices. This can be done with configuration profiles, compliance policies, and conditional access. This essentially gives you the same ability that you normally would have with GPOs on a local AD. And with configuration profiles, there are three distinctive types of configuration profiles that you can apply to your devices to ensure that your users and your devices and your data is secure. The first of those configuration profiles is your device restrictions. This is where you essentially limit the device functionality to enhance the security of your device. This can be implementing policies such as disabling the USB drive on a laptop, or disabling the Bluetooth or AirPrint on an iOS device. The next area is your identity protection, and this is where you can implement your password policies, such as password requirements and complexities, to set ways to allow access to your devices, and where you can also configure Windows Hello, where it allows you to implement a password-free option to access your devices, such as facial recognition, fingerprint scanning, or a PIN. Obviously, this enhances your security because though the biometric data used by the users accessing those devices is unique to each user. There are other types of configuration profiles that you can implement, such as a kiosk with a single app deployment. For example, in a library, when you have a public device for users to access the web, you can deploy a device with a kiosk configuration that allows them access to Edge and a specific set of web pages to allow them to browse the internet. Other things can be done, such as pushing down your email configuration or a VPN certification to your devices. And then we have the endpoint security and the endpoint protection side of the configuration profiles, which is where you'll start implementing your protection policies, such as your configuration of BitLocker. You can deploy your AV policy and your software if you're not using Defender, or you can enable or disable your firewall and implement different types of rules. It obviously helps detect and mitigate threats and ensures the integrity of your device to protect against malware and attacks. Configuration profiles are obviously configuring the device, but with compliance policy, what this does is it's a set of rules and settings that ensures that the devices connecting to your environment meet your company and your security requirements before they can access any resources within your environment. You can set compliance policies such as ensuring that the devices connecting to your environment have AV enabled, BitLocker has been configured, or you can set a minimum allowed version of the OS that's connecting to your environment. You can also restrict personal or mobile devices that have been rooted or jailbroken. And finally, although it's not strictly part of Intune, but it works hand in hand with it, is your conditional access policies. And with conditional access policies, I always like to use an analogy when talking about them. Now, imagine you've been invited to a pool party, and the condition to access said party is that you must be wearing shorts and you must have your invitation. Now, if you turn up to the party wearing jeans and you have your invitation, you won't be allowed in. If you're wearing your shorts but don't have your invitation, likewise, you won't be allowed in. So the same type of scenario can be implemented with your environment, where you can set up conditional access policies such as your users must have MFA enabled in order to access your environment, and they must be connecting from within the UK. So if your users are connecting, they have MFA, but they're on holidays in Spain, they won't be allowed in. This is obviously a very small example, but you can really expand this to meet your requirements and whatever restrictions you want to apply to users connecting to your environment. Now that we've discussed configuration policies, how do we make sure that our devices are kept up to date? Now, it's easy to manage 1 to 10 devices. You can manually check them, you can manually patch them, but it can quickly get out of hand when we're looking at 50 to 500 devices. And with guidance from our Cyber Essentials frameworks here in the UK, we can make sure that the guidelines required and suggested by Cyber Essentials can be implemented by Intune. Primarily, the device updates portal focuses on Windows devices, but you do have ways to make sure that your macOS and iOS devices and your Android devices are patched. For Windows devices, the primary feature is your update rings. And this is where you actually configure your updates configuration policy. This is where you can set your policy on Intune for your managed devices, such as deferral days for quality and feature updates. You can force your Windows 10 devices to be upgraded to Windows 11. You can set a schedule in a maintenance window for your updates and your reboots for those devices. And you can obviously monitor the assignment and the deployment of your updates to those devices. Then we have the feature updates area. And although the update rings manage and control the deployment of those updates, in the feature area is where you set a limit on the OS version that can be deployed to those devices. So today it is that there's a few different versions are supported. For example, 22H2 and 23H2 for Windows 11, and then we have Windows 10 22H2. If you do have a requirement that all of your Windows 11 devices must be on 22H2, you can set the limit on the feature updates. The update rings, although it will try to push the updates, it will never go above the version that you set on the feature updates. Normally, I always have it on the latest, but if you want to keep, you want to be one step behind the latest release, because as we all know, they all come with their own issues. You can do that. Then we have the quality updates area. And this is where you actually can pick up and deploy the hot fixes that are released after the monthly updates. If there is a known security vulnerability, or there's a known issue such as an update has broken all our printers and Microsoft releases an update to fix that, you can actually come into the quality updates area. You can select the hot fix in question, and you can actually deploy those hot fixes to your devices. Now, this is not an automatic deployment area. You will need to be coming on here on a monthly basis if you must to deploy those hot fixes. I normally like to suggest coming on here when you know there is a vulnerability, or you know that there is an update that has broken something within your environment. You can come on here and you can actually deploy them down to the devices without having to go to each individual machine, applying those hot fixes on all of them. And then finally, we have the driver updates area. And this is where you can actually manage the deployments of drivers to your devices. You can either select an automatic deployment of drivers that have been automatically approved by Microsoft, or you can actually set it to be a manual approval process where you come here every so often, look at the drivers that have been identified by the Windows Update feature, and you can actually deploy those individually. Apart from that, as I mentioned, we can do Apple updates. These are not done by the typical Windows management module, updates management module, but you can do it via configuration profiles. You can set settings, basically. You can set the configuration to push all critical and firmware updates to macOS devices, as an example, or you can enforce the latest iOS updates on Apple devices and iOS devices. And a similar thing can be done with Android. If you have specific devices such as Zebra devices for scanners and readers, you can connect your environment to the Zebra manufacturer, and they can send over the air firmware to patch those devices. And similar to iOS, for your Android handsets, you can configure configuration profiles to enforce the updates on those Android devices. Now that we've discussed updates, we can move on to Defender for Endpoint. Now, obviously, Defender now comes with every single Windows 10 and Windows 11 device. I had a dream of starting my own AV company alongside CrowdStrike messing up recently and Defender being deployed to all devices. I think that dream has taken a big dip on the side, and I must settle to configure and selling Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. But I like to think of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint as a puzzle, right? There's different pieces that we can put together to ensure that we deploy and implement the best solution that fits our organization's needs. First of those is your ASR, or attack surface reduction, which allows you, as an example, blocking child processes from running on Office-based apps such as Outlook. You can stop files like Office apps or images of PDFs from running background processes, which is the way that most malware and ransomware attacks happen these days, is with a process that comes attached with a PDF. Your user opens that up, and that's how they get in. You can stop that with ASR. We then have our Defender antivirus, which again, Defender comes on all Windows 10 and 11 devices. But what Defender for Endpoint allows you to do is configure that AV solution. You can enable features such as scanning emails or any downloaded files. You can limit the resources or usage on devices, such as limiting the CPU and the RAM usage whilst it's scanning, so it doesn't really bog down the device whilst the scan is taking place. And you can set schedules for your weekly scans. Next up, we have BitLocker, which enables the configuration of BitLocker and encryption over the cloud to any device across the UK and the world. You can decide which drives can be encrypted, be it your C drive, your data drive. You can encrypt only used storage to allow the actual encryption to happen a lot quicker. You can actually enable the ability to encrypt any removable drives connecting to your endpoints. And finally, we have our firewall, Defender Firewall, which allows you to disable or enable the device's firewall. You can add exceptions and rules to your firewalls to allow specific apps or ports to be open for whichever reason. Along with that, you can obviously monitor your devices to make sure that all of the AVs are up to date, whether there is any threats that have been detected, any quarantine files, and you can enforce the policies. So you can make sure that every single device in your environment that's managed by Intune has your AV or your endpoint protection solution applied to it. And lastly, a lot of time and resources is spent on laptop builds, especially when users are working from home in different regions. You get a laptop, you build it, then you ship it out to the user, you get the user to come into the office. The question that I get asked a lot is there a way that we can magically build the devices without having any IT input? And thankfully there is. Obviously there are different ways that we can do this. Fundamentally, with Autopilot, you can either build the devices and connect them to your Autopilot yourself by extracting the hardware ID from that laptop, adding it to your Autopilot profile in Intune, and shipping the device to the user. They can then log in, and the device will be built based on the device configuration policies that you've done for the devices and your user requirements, whether they need specific apps or if you have shared drives that need mapped for this specific user, you can do that. The other way is with pre-provisioning, and this works with manufacturers such as Dell. You can allow them access to your environment via GDAP permissions, and before they ship those devices out, they can add the hardware ID to your Autopilot profile. So essentially, you can buy a laptop. Dell will add the laptop's details to your Autopilot, and it can get shipped directly to the user. All they have to do is log in, and the devices will be built for them. So that's what Autopilot does. It simplifies the device deployment and build. It saves you a lot of time, apart from the initial configuration. Obviously, once you have your policies, once you have your deployment profile set, there isn't as much need to go and build every single device. And it obviously allows you to automatically set it up from the cloud. The users can be working from home, can be working across the world, and you can make sure that the devices that they get will be built with your configuration and the restrictions that you set on those devices. Now, the actual process of setting up Autopilot is quite simple. First, we must create our deployment profile, which I will be going through on the demo that follows the next couple of slides. We then register the device. Now, we don't go in depth on how to actually register the device on the demo because we don't have a device to play with. If that is a requirement or something that you need to know or would like to know how to do, you can feel free to either reach out. I'll be more than happy to take you through, or we can do another session based on actually enrolling a device in Autopilot. But as I said, that can be done by yourself or the manufacturer. You then assign the deployment profile to the user. This can be done by ensuring that the deployment profile is targeting all devices, or you can build specific security groups, or you can do it based on group tagging. So if you have different types of users in different regions or different countries with different language requirements for the laptop builds, you can do that with group tagging and security policies. We then ship the device to the user once the deployment profile has been assigned to the device. They then log in with their corporate credentials. The device is automatically configured and built based on the policies that you're assigning that device. We then, from that point on, we monitor the device, ensure that all the configurations are applied, make sure that they patch on a monthly basis, your AV is working, and eventually that device will reach the end of its life. You'll retire it. That can be done via Intune. You can either do a remote wipe, or you can just completely reset it, or just remove it from your environment, and then the cycle starts all over again, which is what we like to call the device life cycle. Now, Intune works primarily with Windows 10 and Windows 11, but we can do a similar process with Apple and Apple Business Manager, where you connect your Intune environment to your Apple Business Manager. And a similar process can be done with the Apple Business Manager, ensuring that it picks up all the policies, security requirements, and configurations that you configure on Intune for those devices, and for Android as well. That can be done via the managed Google services, or the Android open source code can be used as well. Linux can't be remotely built or put through Autopilot, but we can enroll Linux on our environment. Obviously, it's very limited. There are many flavors of Linux out there, but ideally, Ubuntu, for example, will work, and you can enroll those devices to Intune, and you can apply some configuration settings to them. Now that we've discussed all of these different things, appreciate that I'm running through them. And as I said, I can spend 45 minutes talking about each of these things. We'll go to the next section, which is our actual demo scenario. This is a 15-minute session where we go back to the 5 challenges that we discussed at the start of this webinar, and we'll try to tackle those challenges individually. So for your device ecosystem, how do we manage them? We have a requirement that we're deploying brand new Windows 11 devices. How do we streamline the deployment and the rollout of those devices? We're going to be implementing some compliance policies to ensure that the devices connecting to our environment have BitLocker enabled, have a password to unlock, and have AV enabled. We'll be configuring a couple of apps and pushing it down to the newly deployed deployment profiles. We'll be configuring BitLocker encryption and a simple AV policy. And we'll be configuring an update ring with a maintenance window to install those updates immediately between 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Now, this is a bit of a longer demo, and this is where I hope that you get most of your benefit from this webinar. If you do have any questions, as I said, I'll be in the chat. I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. There we go. I'll start this up. I'll see you after this. Excellent. Hopefully everyone stuck through that session. As I said on that demo, there is a lot more that we can go into. We didn't configure configuration profiles. We didn't do a lot of the base configurations that we can apply to the devices. So if you do have any specific requirements, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to jump on a call with you, discuss those with you. I can help you look at your environment and see where we can improve it and enhance it to meet your requirements. Now, we've had a couple of questions, and I believe we have some. One from Brandon that says we currently have 70 devices on local AD. Will prevent us from using Intune? No, it doesn't actually. If you do have an M365 environment, you can do something called hybrid joined Enter ID, which basically allows you to configure hybrid join Intune devices. You'll need to connect Intune to your local AD via an Intune connector. Typically, you can deploy this connector on IT management VM that has access to your AD. You need to specify an OU for these devices to go through, but you can manage devices connected to a local AD via Intune. That's certainly a possibility. And apart from that, we had a couple from Andre in regards to deploying non-Microsoft applications. Obviously, we deployed Office and we deployed apps via the Microsoft Store. You can deploy any apps via Intune as long as you have an EXE or an MSI installer. We can package those up and we can push those down via Intune. The only disadvantage by doing that is that the actual, if there are updates on the apps, it won't push those updates to the devices. So you need to keep on top of it, and you need to replace that EXE and the MSI on Intune. But again, we'll focus more on apps because there's a lot more that you can do with it on subsequent sessions. Let's see whether we have any other questions. From Andre, ideally, we'd like to discuss upgrades from Windows 10 to 11 via Intune. Yes, that's a possibility. As I said, it is possible. We've done it. The things that you need to be careful with is obviously I'll do it in a controlled manner. I'll target a group of users at a time based on security groups to make sure that not everything gets upgraded at the same time, because you might have quite a few users or at your door the morning that happens. Obviously, you need to make sure that the apps that you actually are using within your environment are compatible with Windows 11, but that's a possibility. You can do that via Intune. And one from David is a really specific question. If a user has a supervised iPhone, is there a way to unmanage it and remove it from the company data without? Yes, you can. Now, it depends how that device was joined, right? But you can effectively remove your corporate apps and your corporate data from that device. Now, it depends whether you've implemented things such as app protection policies, right? Whether you stop that user from extracting your corporate data to the local device. If they, for example, downloaded a bunch of Excel documents and Word documents to the local device, you won't be able to extract that data specifically, but you can remove your corporate apps and data if you have any manage data on those devices via Intune. That's a possibility. That can be done with iOS, that can be done with Android and Windows devices, for example, on personal or BYOD devices from contractors and freelancers that can work in your environment. And I think, yeah, so Brandon says he seconds Andre. But yeah, I don't think we have any other questions unless there's some others in the Q&A, which there aren't. Well, I hope you learned something, and some you got some hints on how to use Intune and the possibilities of it. As I said, we can probably spend a lot more time discussing each individual one. But if you do have any questions, that's my email address. Feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to engage and answer any further questions that you might have.
Cheers, John. I think there was one more. There's one more question I was spotted, but we'll go. I appreciate we're at time now, so we'll make sure, Ola, we come back to you separately on that question. But yeah, just to thank everyone for joining. There'll be an invite. There's another, as we mentioned earlier, and what Jhonny mentioned, there's going to be more webinars on this topic around working with external parties. That's the next one. So yeah, look out for that. And just a thank you for joining. And as I said, hope you found at least one nugget of information to take away. And that's all we can ask for. So yeah, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Well, thank you. I saw that question, by the way. If you're still here, Brandon, you can use GPOs on Intune, or you can effectively apply the same rules and the same permissions that you have on your GPOs. You can find those in Intune and you can apply them. And you can actually extract your GPOs and import them into Intune. Now, it can be quite fidgety to get it working, but you can do that as well. That's a possibility. You can export them and import them. But yeah, thank you for joining. And yeah, if you have any questions, reach out. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.